What is something you thought was normal? I thought that everybody has to go to a hospital at every 3 months for a checkup and has their blood sample taken and ultrasound done. Turns out no, my classmates were horrified when I began to explain in detail how does certain medical procedures work and where I got my scar on my stomach. To sum it up, I had kidney cancer at the age of 4. It was so bad the surgeon had to remove my whole left kidney. I really thought that this was normal. My father is a cancer survivor, my mother has rheumatoid arthritis. Going to any kind of doctor is basically a family trip for us. Now I am more mindful of how I speak about this, because when I was younger I used to say things like, and that's how I got my blood drawn 16 times on one day. But the nurse was so nice, she played Polly Pockets with me after that. Laughing face. And the face my classmate and her mother made is burned into my head this day.
It's interesting how our experiences shape our perceptions of normalcy. You grew up around a lot of medical stuff, so it's understandable you'd think regular checkups were common. It's wild how people can react to that though. Sounds like you had a tough childhood experience, but it's good you're aware of how to discuss it now. Everyone has a different background, and not everyone can relate to yours.
I had a headache, which happens sometimes. I don't know that I'd call it normal, but it's not so abnormal that I saw it as cause for immediate concern. Whatever, I'll just go to bed early, surely I'll be fine the next day. A visit to the emergency department led to a nearly 2-week stay in the hospital, where they administered an MRI, which led to a diagnosis of acute autoimmune idiopathic disseminated encephalomyelitis. In other words, for no readily apparent reason, my immune system decided something it should attack is the protein sheath that is the insulation for the complex circuit that is the brain. It's not supposed to do that.
That's quite a turn of events from thinking it was just a headache to a hospital stay. It's surprising how the body can react unexpectedly. Autoimmune issues can be tricky since you don't always know what's going on until it's serious. Hope you're managing well with the diagnosis. It must be a lot to process. Just take it one step at a time and focus on recovery.
That repeat illnesses with pneumonia and sinus infections was just part of having allergies and asthma. 2 years ago, at my annual appointment, my immunologist asked me to get a blood panel I'd never heard of before. I've had the test several times now, and it turns out it's an antibody titer, and I don't retain immunity to polysaccharide bacteria, even with repeat immunizations. I've had a pneumovax every year for almost 15 years and I have almost no immunity to 14 of the 23 variants tested, and, of the ones I do have some immunity to, only 2 have fully protective immunity. What kills me is that my mom, who was a critical care nurse, was convinced that I had something amiss with my immune system. She passed away in 2009 unexpectedly and I didn't get to tell her she was right. Way to go, Mom.
It sounds like you've been through a lot with your health. Dealing with pneumonia and persistent infections is tough. The discovery about your immune system must have been a lot to take in. It's understandable to have regrets about not being able to share that realization with your mom. It's good that you're learning more about your condition now. Hopefully, you can find better ways to manage it moving forward.
That my dad would never speak to me. Like, at all. He would rarely eat meals with me, never asked about my day, or had any interest in what I'd been up to. But, he would pounce on the opportunity to yell at me or belittle me for any perceived failure. There were never any mistakes or accidents, only personal failures that meant I was doomed for failure forever, and that meant I was utterly worthless. It never ended as long as I lived with him, but he chilled out later after getting cancer. I intentionally rebuilt our relationship, mostly because I think he's probably autistic, definitely was abused as a kid, and was not able to form emotions in a healthy way, and because I want that closure when he does eventually pass away.
That's a heavy situation. It sounds like a toxic relationship growing up. Your dad's behavior seems to have affected you a lot. It's good to see you trying to rebuild things now, even if it's complicated. Understanding his background might help with the closure you're looking for. It's tough to navigate those feelings. Just hope you're taking care of yourself through it all.
That your partner shouldn't cheat on you. I grew up with my dad constantly cheating on my mom and being her therapist through it. I would go through his phone for her or listen to them fight and then be the therapist for her the next day. I never knew how bad it was until I met my friend's parents who loved one another, rarely fought, and never had issues with cheating. When I spoke about the things I knew, like my parents swinging, and how my life played out, they were horrified. I still struggle with being the therapist friend and allowing myself to be treated like shit and cheated on.
It's tough to deal with that kind of experience growing up. Seeing your parents' relationship dynamic can really shape your views on love and trust. Meeting friends with healthier relationships must have given you some perspective. It's a challenge to break patterns that feel normal but are really harmful. Knowing your worth is key, and it sounds like you're working on that, even if it's hard.
Grew up with an erratic, volatile, unpredictable, very unusual, quite beautiful mother who I thought was eccentric, and it was just normal to me. She spoke with a strong accent and was very silly and flighty and energetic and would enroll me in things but then sabotage the event: children's pageants, department store modeling runways, local TV shows, summer children's events, acting auditions, pets that were gifted but always disappeared after a week or so. I learned not to get attached to anything or situation. The upside though was that I very quickly realized that, even as a very young child, I could not depend on her much and needed to always rely on myself for planning and safety and care. I became super independent and capable at a young age. It made me very strong and creative and self-confident. But it all got much worse later: public fits, outbursts, arson, nudity, inappropriate language, and we realized that she was mentally ill, finally diagnosed as schizophrenic, moved on to near constant paranoid hallucinations and a frightening death. This was all a long time ago though. She passed more than 35 years ago.
That sounds like a really complex childhood. Growing up with a parent who was so unpredictable must have been difficult. It's interesting how you learned to be independent and resilient from all of that. It's a tough experience to navigate, especially with her struggles later on. It's good you've got some distance from it now, but I imagine it still shapes your perspective today.
Apparently, yelling at every minor inconvenience is not normal. I grew up with people who would do that, and I thought everyone did the same. Then one day, I was out with my friend and she accidentally took the wrong turn at the highway. Her response was, "Oh oops, guess I gotta take another route." The responses I'm accustomed to were slamming the steering wheel and yelling curse words out loud, and a lot of blaming. I asked my friend, "Are you not angry you took the wrong turn?" She was confused. No. Why would I be? For the first time in almost 2 decades, I realized that normal isn't as normal as I thought.
It's interesting how we normalize certain reactions based on our environment. Your experience shows how our upbringing shapes our responses. The contrast between your friend's calmness and what you're used to is quite stark. It's a moment of realization that maybe not everyone reacts the same way. It's good to question these norms and maybe find a more balanced way to handle inconveniences.
Hey, look at this party trick I can do. Dislocates kneecaps, fingers, and shoulders. Turns out I got a connective tissue disorder called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Those party tricks screwed me over badly, and my mom just said it was normal for our family, so we never went to see a doctor why I can dislocate stuff. Until I, 21 years old at that time, met my boyfriend and he went, that ain't normal. Went to doctors, got declared disabled, knee reconstruction which took me 3 years to rehabilitate.
That's a tough situation. It's wild how something that seems like a fun trick can lead to serious issues. Getting diagnosed with a connective tissue disorder must have been a relief but also a lot to handle. Rehabilitation sounds intense and time-consuming. Glad you got support from your boyfriend when you needed it. It's important to listen to your body, even if others might not take it seriously.
Not having a single relationship between 14 and 25. I used to think it was okay, you should be able to learn and understand relationships even without the experience. But of course, just like finding a job, you need experience or you have nothing. I am out of energy scrambling for the last 4 years to try to find something after getting a light taste of it, literally a 2-month abusive LDR, and while my everything screams out for more, I can't find anything. Advice for anyone young. Chase your dream career, sure, but do not ever neglect relationships and try your best to at least get some experience before your mid-20s. Don't end up like me, in a low-end job with no prospects, no relationships ever, few friends and all of my family dead.
It sounds like you've been through a lot and are reflecting on your experiences. It's tough to feel isolated. Relationships can really shape your life. Trying to balance career and personal connections can be tricky, but it's good to hear you're sharing your perspective. It might also help to focus on building friendships first, which could lead to more meaningful connections in the future. Things can always change with time.
My heart rate was getting up to like 180 sometimes when I would walk to class back in 2021. It concerned me a bit, but my mom just told me I was probably out of shape or something. Turns out I was super anemic. Like literally only had half the blood in my body I was supposed to. Had to go to the ER for a blood transfusion because they were concerned I could go into cardiac arrest. And I was walking 20 minutes across my college campus multiple times a day, doing yoga and cardio for like 2 months, all while being that anemic before I got the transfusion. In the end, I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Anemia is one of the symptoms.
That sounds rough. Walking while that anemic must have been tough on your body. It's good that you got the blood transfusion when you did. Crohn's can be a lot to deal with, especially with all the other symptoms that come with it. Hope you found a way to manage it better now. Just glad you're doing okay after that whole situation.
I would get so irritated at socializing and noise. Get mad at my brother for the volume being too loud. Get mad at 2 people for talking at the same time. Go to classes, work, and come home to not wanting to talk to anyone in my family. I just wanted to go to my room, turn off the lights and lay in silence. Most people would be irritated in these situations, but I was aggressively angry and would start yelling, when I'm not a confrontational person, had chest pains, and would claw at my skin if I couldn't get peace and quiet. I later found out I had autism, which is not bad, but can be hell in certain situations, and sensory overload. My brain can't handle so much noise before I mentally break down.
It's tough dealing with sensory overload. You really just want some peace but end up feeling overwhelmed. That frustration can lead to outbursts that seem out of character. Finding out about autism helps make sense of it all, even if it doesn't fix the struggle. It's okay to need quiet time to recharge. Everyone has their limits, and it's important to recognize them.
I grew up in the South and used to love the rebel flag. Never once did I associate it with racism, although why not I don't know. It just never crossed my mind. I had black friends and even black family members by marriage and nobody ever mentioned it. I'm reasonably intelligent and fairly well read but was in my 40s before the racism aspect clicked. And there I was with all rebel horse tack and my favorite belt buckle, etc. Fortunately, when I found out, I did reach out to apologize, but nobody was seriously offended knowing I wasn't a white power kind of person.
It's interesting how perspectives change over time. Growing up in a certain environment can shape our views without us really questioning them. It sounds like you had a realization that many people might not have had. That ability to reflect and apologize shows growth. It's good that your friends understood your intent. The past can be tricky, but it's important to learn from it.
I suffered workplace abuse during my teaching internships and I thought it was normal because I was not the only one. I had colleagues who were reprimanded all the time at the schools where they did internships. I thought it was normal when our internship supervisor yelled at us in the classroom and made us repeat all the lesson plans. And I thought it was normal that in the schools we went to they wouldn't let us teach class, but we were the personal assistants of the teachers. I was forced to do all the dirty work and receive the blame. I thought everything was normal and so were other girls until we got tired. We filed a complaint and the university, instead of supporting us, expelled us 1 semester away from finishing the degree.
It's tough to see how you started to normalize that kind of treatment. It's unsettling when the system doesn't protect you or support you, especially after dealing with so much. It's a disappointing turn when you stand up for yourself only to face repercussions instead of help. That's not what should happen in an educational environment. Hope things get better from here.
It's not really bad, but the complete lack of any affection or feelings between my parents. They never hold hands while walking on the streets, kiss each other or even hug. When I was 11 or 12 I started going to some friend's house to spend the weekend, have a sleepover, and I saw their parents doing it and found odd my parents didn't do it. It's just a failed marriage that keeps going because my mom is too afraid of her relatives' judgment and doesn't want to lose any material things she bought while with my father, and my dad is too lazy to do anything. And for about 20 years now my mom has seen another guy as well, but that I already knew was fucked up when I found out.
It sounds like a tough situation. Growing up without seeing any affection can be confusing. It's understandable to notice the differences with your friends' families. Your parents' relationship seems to have a lot of complicated issues, and sticking together for reasons other than love isn't uncommon. It's rough to see your mom involved with someone else too. That's a lot to deal with as a kid.
I grew up in a broken home with a mentally ill mother and my dad and stepmother, and everybody had an attitude that we didn't matter for anything. So, I didn't understand when parents paid attention to kids, talked to kids, went to their kids' activities, etc. Basically, Being ignored and made to feel like you weren't worth anything until you were an adult when you could take care of yourself seemed like it was normal for me. Unfortunately, they didn't prepare me for adulthood, and I'm still struggling with a sense of being a valid human at 58.
It sounds like you went through a lot growing up. Feeling invisible in a family can really leave a mark. It's tough when the people who are supposed to support you don't. That void can linger into adulthood, affecting how you see yourself and your worth. It's never too late to work on that, though. Understanding these feelings is a step towards healing.
I was the same way. I had friends who couldn't see one parent or another because of abuse, so I figured my childhood wasn't normal but not that bad. Got asked, "Tell me about your childhood," in therapy, and I said that it was relatively normal except for the police. She asked what I meant and brought up that they were at my house all the time because my parents would be super fucked up and fight. Then I mentioned that I was legally kidnapped by my mom and laughed because I always treated it as a quirky, "I was kidnapped but not how you think" thing instead of, "I was separated from my dad for a few weeks and when I got home my mom was arrested." It's a two-way street because I felt like I was relatively headstrong and drinking all of the time was, well, it hasn't affected me like the rest of my family, so it's whatever. Plus I just like to party. Then the party stopped but the numbness didn't, and it became the only way I could really experience emotions. Had a good thing going until the DTs started.
It's interesting how we shape our views of childhood based on what we see. You seem to have normalized the chaos around you, which can often happen. The idea of being legally kidnapped is heavy even if it sounds quirky on the surface. It's like you found a way to cope, but it eventually caught up with you. The detachment from emotions and reliance on substances is something a lot of people can relate to.
I was spanked a few times as a kid, but my buddy would get clubbed with a table leg. I never said anything because, well, I thought it was normal if you acted out. I was, however, made to believe my emotions don't really matter. Both my parents were middle kids who rarely got emotional and couldn't understand why I'd get angry. My parents were mostly good parents and by comparison, saints. They were not without fault, and it took me a while to figure that out. But again, from what I saw from my friends' families, I had a mostly good upbringing. My parents love each other and both me and my sister, but they are boomers, and tried their best. Comparing trauma is pointless and everyone feels what they feel, you don't get to decide how I feel. Not you personally, lol.
It's interesting how upbringing shapes emotions and perceptions. Parents do their best with what they know, and it can be tough to navigate those feelings. Comparing experiences doesn't usually help. Everyone processes things differently, and what matters is finding your own understanding. It's good to recognize that your feelings are valid, no matter the circumstances. Just like you mentioned, we all have our own paths in life.
This is the hardest part about being a teacher. Not just what kids go through, but how nonchalant they are about revealing horrible shit. They just think it's normal. Yeah, my mom doesn't let me leave the room except for food, haha. I'm literally stuck in there all day unless I'm at school. Yeah, I have an adult severely disabled brother who is nonverbal and violent and touchy, and basically I have to take care of him. Feed him and bathe him and everything. 15-year-old girl, one kid was bragging to another kid that his house had 3 rooms. And bushes, and a yard. Because most of them live in absolute abject poverty with predominantly single parents who work 3 jobs.
It's tough to see how these kids just accept their situations. They share things that sound extreme without really showing how much it affects them. It's like they've become numb to it all. Makes you think about what should be considered normal. The contrast between their experiences and what others might consider a typical life is striking and pretty sad. It's important to listen and understand where they are coming from.